And thank you so much for joining me in this week's YouTube video. This week, I am sharing a special replay for you that was done during the Middle School Math Summit. I'm sharing this as a special treat just for you, my valued YouTube viewer. So grab your favorite beverage, grab your favorite notebook and Flair pen because so many knowledge gems were dropped during this interview, and I don't want you to miss a thing. Enjoy and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Middle School Math Summit. I'm your host, Kathy Martin, and I am so excited to bring you our interview with the one and only Chrissy Allison. Chrissy, thank you so much for being part of this event, and I am so excited to chat and talk all things bridging the gap in middle school math. Before we dive into our questions, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and life as an educator?
Yes. So my journey started over 20 years ago as a middle school math teacher. I actually, in my first couple of years, taught pretty much all the subjects, but one thing that was steady and constant was teaching middle school. And then after that, I moved into an instructional coaching role. I worked within a charter system that I had taught at here in Chicago, where I live. And then after about 12 years in the school setting, I transitioned to a role outside of the school at two different educational nonprofits. And there I had the chance to create resources and professional development materials in order to support schools and districts across our country to improve math teaching and learning. And that was really interesting and allowed me to really build my perspective of what are some of the common challenges that teachers are having and leaders are having, and that we can help our students overcome. And so with all of that knowledge and being in these different roles, I decided to start my own consulting and coaching business, Mindful Math Coach. And so now I spend my time in a few different ways, consulting with schools and districts, providing free and low priced workshops and resources for people online, and then coaching math leaders virtually who are new in their coaching roles and need support. So thank you for having me, Kathy. I'm excited to be here and share, to have this conversation with you about this topic that is like always been a challenge, I think, for middle and high school math, but it's just elevated and it's just magnified even more so now, given the pandemic and what everybody's been through the past few years.
We are so excited to have you because the teachers in my membership and in my world, when I told them that we were having someone talk about math gaps, I was like, what questions do you have? And I was like, it blew up just with the amount of questions to really kind of sift through and pick out some of the best ones. So I'm really excited to chat with you today. And I know that the teachers who are, part of this event are also just going to be so excited with the information. So speaking of what you just said, just the fact that the pandemic and everything has really elevated and has really kind of magnified just the gaps that we are seeing with students. Where do we even start with the idea of bridging these math gaps? Because I think that's been a huge frustration for teachers. And I think it's really kind of made teachers question how good of a teacher they are. It's almost feeling like there's nothing I can do, So where do we even start?
Yes, I totally understand that. So before I get into like concrete strategies, I think the way I see it, I'm always like a big picture kind of person. And I think part of the big picture that's important to think about is two things that I'll mention. One is I always like to start with teachers in helping them articulate their vision for their math classroom. So because what can happen sometimes when we're focused on gaps that kids have or how far behind they are is sometimes strategies that we really wouldn't want to be using otherwise in our classrooms. So I always like to help teachers ground in like, what is your vision for your math class? what do you want students to be doing? What brings you to life? What brings them to life? And most of the time, teachers will say things like, kids who are problem solvers, they're doing the deep thinking, they're talking to one another and solving rich problems and all these kinds of things. So that's one. The second piece that I always like to keep in mind and top of mind really is the student's experience, who they are as people, and sort of the emotional side. I have a podcast episode on my Mindful Math podcast where I talk about this. And really how I put these pieces together was through helping my son potty train. I'll spare you the details, but it took us a lot of years. And throughout that time, I had questions about myself as a parent. Like, what am I doing wrong? Why is it that this is not sticking? And meanwhile, his self-confidence and his self-image were going to a more and more negative place. Because he could see
down the potty.
And he could see how frustrated we were. And he was frustrated with himself and his negative self-talk. It was really heartbreaking. And that experience gave me this additional layer to think about in terms of supporting students who have some catching up to do, because I think a lot of them feel like my son. What is wrong with me? Why can't I get this? And what ends up happening is a lot of those students, they internalize it. They think they're bad at math. And then they start hating math because most of us don't like things we don't feel we're good at. And so with those two things in mind, those are really the first two steps in a process that I like to take teachers through when I'm working with them. So again, one is grounding them in what is their vision, getting really clear on no matter who your students are that you're teaching and where they are in the learning progression, what do you want your classroom to be like and feel like? And then secondly, how can you invest your students into that? How can you help bring your students along? And that includes building a classroom climate where they feel, they know mistakes are okay, and they feel like their voice, not just feel like, they know their voice is valued. And so that's where we're all familiar with growth mindset, right? And that kind of stuff. But I feel like that's where that comes in, is helping, taking some time to build that in your classroom and setting the stage before we just jump into intervention strategies and things like that, because they're humans and they are probably coming with some baggage. If they're that far behind or they've been through the pandemic, and if you ignore that, I feel like you might miss the mark then when you get into the lessons. So that's 1 and 2. Do you have a question before I keep going?
No, it's great because this is perfect timing because we're going into a new school year.
Yeah.
So it's just a good reminder to put some of those processes, not processes, but I guess processes in place, just that first few days, first week, and just continue that along, especially in those first few weeks of school, of creating that culture of your classroom.
100%. Yeah. And I know everybody's talking about building thinking classrooms right now. Have you read it?
I have not, but I know it's on my to-do list.
It's on your list, of course, right? But even in that book, Peter talks about starting off, if you're shifting to this kind of format, starting off with non-curricular tasks that kids can just get into and kind of have fun with, and before you get so into this is my grade level standard. And I feel like it's the same thing with building the culture in your classroom. If you're doing some icebreakers, or you're doing some team building things, or you're doing some just we always did growth mindset lessons, honestly.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, our team realized, we were okay, let's do some lessons where we set the stage for the fact that mistakes are okay. We set the stage for the fact of differentiation. We used to, we had this one lesson built off of this story of the 3 Ralphs that I was familiar with as a child. And it's just this really silly story where there's this family, this made up family, who has kids of 3 different age levels. and they end up treating them all the same because they're trying to be fair. So they end up having all the kids wear diapers, even though one is way older. They have all the kids, just like doing these silly things. And it was a way for the kids to articulate to us that what's fair is really everybody getting what they need.
Yes.
Not us doing the exact same thing to everybody. And so that was a worthwhile beginning of year activity because we knew we were going to at different times differentiate in a way where not everybody was going to have the same thing or, that kind of thing. And so I've noticed when we skip doing that, a lot of the other stuff falls flat. So do you want me to keep going in the process?
Yeah. So
okay. So we're only on step 2.
No, I appreciate you saying all of that because those are really good reminders. And I really like that you've really differentiated between the teacher vision and really keeping in mind like what our students feel, because I think we consider that, but we are so often, and I'm not saying this, in a negative way, but we're just caught up in, we have to make progress. We have to meet standards. We have to get them. We have to, and like you feel bad, but we still have to do X, Y, Z, or else, like we're worried that we're going to get in trouble with our principals, whatever. Like we have all this pressure too. So
totally.
It's just good. It's just a good reminder to that we have to keep both things in mind. But yes,
it is. And the truth is that you'll go further faster when students do feel good about it, when they are having a positive experience, and when you're both rowing in the same direction. So that's step 2 of like investing students in your vision, is to get you on the same page so that there isn't pushback when you're introducing a new instructional routine, or there isn't and that's actually what the key ended up being with my son. We worked with a potty training consultant, and she took it back to the emotional. And honestly, like within a couple of weeks, we had made significant progress. And so it is for students and their souls and them being just the humanness of it all.
Right.
But
Seen
it
and heard,
actually
right? We want them to
leads
feel
to better results anyway. So it's like, it's a win-win.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So vision, make sure our students are invested. And that's really important because the kids ultimately want to please you, right? I think as humans, we want to please our teacher, please our boss, please like our parents,
Yeah.
So I think if you can build that relationship, they're just gonna want to do well. And there are layers, other things going on. But okay, step 3.
Yeah. Step 3. So step 3 is providing entry to grade level content. So it's starting with grade level content most of the time. I would say at least probably 90% of the time. There is a reality that when students are missing some of those key prerequisites, there are some topics where we need to go back a little bit first. But by and large, starting with grade level content, but applying strategies and adapting lessons in a way where all students have entry to that grade level content. After that, I like to work with teachers on engaging students in deep thinking. And because a lot of times what tends to happen is we'll put that grade level content in front of students. And if they are, again, have some skills that we're still working on, if they struggle and they're like, I don't know what to do, it's easy for us to go into rescue mode or over scaffolding. And so I think it's important to really think about how are we providing that entry into it, and then how are we giving them the chance to problem solve, reason, do all those things, even if they have unfinished learning.
Do you have any suggestions or any strategies that we could implement to make that happen?
I do. I actually have a list of 10 strategies that I have. If you all want to see them, I don't know if we can link them under this video or if I should tell people where to go to get them.
Yeah, just let us know. Where do we go?
You can go to www.mindfulmathcoach.com/bundle. But some of them are things that you're probably already familiar with, like instructional routines. So one of my favorites is just to add a notice and wonder. So a lot
Okay.
of times,
Love that.
if you have a task where the question asks them to do something right off the bat, or, so sometimes it's like, I don't know, like a whole scenario, and then, write a system of equations that X, Y, like does blah, blah, blah. You can just remove that question, turn it into a notice and wonder first, get some ideas out, from the collective, and then give them that next part, then reveal the question and allow them to try to write the system of equations. But sometimes just that brainstorm of all the kids in the class sharing what they notice and what they wonder is enough to get everybody to the place of being able to attempt to get into it. I think another thing building off of that is shifting your mindset about what does it mean to meaningfully engage in a task? So even as I was like describing that, I think setting yourself free as a teacher from thinking, I need to give my students things and tasks and problems where I think they can do it on their own, independently, the first time correctly, to I need to set the stage and set the table for them to be able to understand what I'm asking them to do or what the problem is asking them to grapple with, and have enough to do so in a meaningful way where they're doing some thinking on it. Even if they can't get all the way there by themselves, even if they can't get to the correct answer yet, but that they can take 5 minutes or so by themselves or with a partner and mess around with it. Because then you can come around and ask questions. Then you can have a whole class discussion where you share strategies. Then you can like build on it. But I do think it's important for all students to have time to do a little something by themselves so that they're invested in the next step. They're invested in the discussion and they have something to share and they can really participate instead of just sitting back and waiting for you as the teacher to like reveal the correct answer and then they just copy it down, and there's sort of no point to that.
And hopefully you as the teacher are creating a culture in the classroom where students are willing to work, because I feel like now, like, I could get down a whole rabbit hole of like, well, student, like, what if you have the kids that just sit there and like don't participate, and but that's a whole nother topic.
Well, I think it's related though, and I do think it goes back to that investing students step. That's why it's so important, because again, if you just come in with these like new strategies and you're like, now instead of doing
Now talk to each
guided
other,
notes,
right?
like
Yeah.
I'm going to just have you try it. Like, I mean, unless you want to revolt in your classroom, like that, that's where that step came from, right? Because like I created these steps from experiences where we missed some of these steps and we saw what
Right.
happened.
No, because I know in my own experience, it's like if I didn't train my students to, and I am guilty of like, of we do guided notes and go ahead and do this on your own now. And, so, but when I tried to incorporate partner and talking, and it's like, I didn't train them up for that, then it's like, they just sat there because they just expected me. They're like, well, she'll be back in 5 minutes to give us the answer. We're just like,
Yeah,
talk and,
exactly. Like my
yeah.
team and I, we spent a whole quarter, maybe even a whole semester talking about growth mindset with each other and coming up with activities and metaphors and analogies and things to do with our students to help them be willing to engage. Because we had a whole time period in there where we were noticing so many like behaviors you were saying, so many
Mhm.
students not starting the work, lots of assessments with they would put IDK.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And so our first step was like, how do we help students feel comfortable enough to attempt it?
Just to guess something, right?
Just to be willing to go there. Right. And so, like,
Yeah.
we shared ideas with each other. And one of them was like, having them read an article about growth mindset, having them understand about malleable intelligence and how your brain grows only when you exercise it. And using this idea of like, my favorite one is like, if I were to go to the gym and like sit in the back and watch the spin instructor on the bike, I like, would I get stronger? Like, would I? Like, and it's so obvious that the answer is no. But just putting that in front of kids and having them like talk about that and pull that out themselves, then we would have teachers who would put something like that on a poster and they could point back to it and say, remember when we talked about, you know, how you grow your muscles and how you grow your brain, like right now. And they could just like connect it to whatever the task was. Like right now, like I know this one is kind of challenging, but like it's growing your brain. And so I want you to like really try, you know, and that kind of thing. But it's building that investment or like that understanding of how you learn. And really, I think pulling back the curtain to explain to students, why am I going to shift the way I'm doing lessons? Or why in this room are we doing it differently than maybe what you've had in the past? Because otherwise it is confusing to them. They're like,
Yeah.
my last 5 teachers taught me math. I don't know what you're doing here. You know, so you have to explain to them like that you why you are going to be more of a facilitator. And I found that like once kids get that, they're like, they get it. Like once you explain that, they get it. And it increases engagement. Like they are more willing. We had a lot of success with that, but it did take, you know, a semester probably to have that happen.
Okay.
I don't even know where I was like, did I answer your question?
It's because I distracted you. I distracted you and asked you about strategies for entry in grade level content. So
oh, the other thing I was going to say, Kathy, is it can be also as simple as how you launch your task. There are simple ways to, so like I taught middle school. Middle school kids love a challenge. So sometimes it's positioning the problem as a challenge. Like, and using enthusiasm, using the inflection of your voice to say like, you know, I don't know, I'm trying to think of one like off the top of my head. Maybe you're like graphing lines on a coordinate plane and you're just like, I wonder like how many different points can you come up with that would work in this equation? Like raise your hand if you think you can come up with one. Raise your hand if you think you can come up with 2. Okay, I'm going to set a timer for 60 seconds. Like, let's see.
Then it's like, I bet you can't come up with at least 4 or whatever.
Or like, like something like that. And then they're like, yes, I can, you know, and then you're like, go for it. Something like that versus just like, now turn to page 30. Like, there's a linear equation there. I want you to. It's like, so sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's showing a video, right? Like like you can get fancy with it. But literally I found sometimes the simplest way is just how you present it to them. Or even another one I like to say is kind of accountability, holding them accountable for, let's use that same example. Okay, so right now I'm going to give you 60 seconds to come up with at least 3 points that are graphed on this line. Like I'm going to be walking around and in 3 minutes, I'm going to have you like, whatever. Like you're going to come up and put a Post-it note on here of like one of the points you came up with or something like that. Most students are going to do that. But a lot of times in our classes, the way we teach is this like, there's not that much accountability. You know, so you might just say like, okay, try this. And then, all right, who wants to share? Well, if 3 kids want to raise their hand and share, then
it's the same 3 kids.
Like if you don't want to, then you're like, whatever, I'm just going to let Jamie share, you know? So sometimes it's just like thinking about how can I make it in a way where they know like how much time they have and like what's going to happen after that. Or sometimes I love doing the ones where it's like, do you agree or disagree with so-and-so? Or like, here's something, you know, here's a line that Jamal graphed or something. I want you to study that and decide if you think that like, did he do it correctly or incorrectly? And in 60 seconds, like we're going to vote. We're going to stand up and like You're going to go to yes or no, or you're going to go to like correct or incorrect, like on the side of the room. So then everybody has to commit one way or the other.
I love doing that, but like sticking in like people that they care about. Like, okay, Swift says, do you agree with Taylor Swift or do you agree with Beyonce? Or, like whoever,
Yeah.
like the person that they like that's famous in music or whatever these days. So it just kind of adds that little bit of connection for them. So, yeah.
And I love that too for students with unfinished learning who are maybe working on their confidence in math, because I know at the end, then I just have to commit to yes or no.
Yeah.
I don't have to independently like generate an equation by myself right now, or something like that, where there's so many possibilities. It like narrows the choices there and the decision point. I just need enough evidence or like a reason that I'm saying yes, or a reason I'm saying no, and I can participate. Like I can pick a side of the room to walk to, and I can volunteer to share why I leaned in that direction.
Yeah. Okay. We diverted a little bit, but I think it was all good stuff. So what is the next step in our bridging the gap?
So step 5 is re-engaging students using discussion. And so this is building off of David Foster's work about re-engagement, where it's really all about looking at student work and using student work to drive the learning and to like deepen students' understandings and to address misconceptions. So you could use this after you give an exit ticket and you're looking and you're like, okay, I can see most students understood this from today's lesson, but there's a group of students who got this part wrong, or there's this misconception that I see is across many of my students, and I want to start off tomorrow addressing that. You can also use it like after a unit test or a quiz or something like that. But basically what you're doing is looking at students' work, assessing where you want to go deeper with them or something that you want to address, and then you just select. It's like the 5 practices model, but just after an assessment, you select which pieces you want to show and what you want to ask students to talk about with each other. So you might show one and just say what we just talked about. Do you think this one is correct, or do you think it's incorrect, and why? Or you can show 2 different ones and say, what do you like, what's similar about these 2 and what's different about these 2? And so it's like the simplest lesson plan. I've planned with teachers for this, and it's like they love it. And it's really fun, by the way, to plan, but it's also very fast and simple because you're looking at your student work, which you're going to anyway, right? Like you're going to do that assessment piece. And then you're just building your lesson by picking a few of them and thinking about what prompt you're going to give. And so this is really great to do instead of a do now the next day, or instead of a like reteach lesson where you just go back through the steps you already taught them. It's also great, I think could be great as like a review for a quiz. So if you have them do something like 2 days before a quiz or a test, and then you just collect it and you can look, and then the next day your lesson is a discussion of that work, very strategically selected. And all the students walk away with a much deeper understanding. But I think that one just acknowledges that like we learn at different paces, we learn from different experiences. We're not going to all get it on the first pass. And so once you have that formative assessment data and you might see, oh, we still have more to work on, this is a great approach to address those misconceptions, or like to like take it further for students, but it's still in line with most math teachers' vision of what they want. Again, a lot of the times, like if you think of a traditional reteach, it's kill and drill. It's like taking notes yet again. It's like following, like mimicking the teacher examples, that kind of thing.
More practice.
It's not what most of us would say we want our math classes to be in. So this is just, I think, a great alternative.
I like that the discussion also allows other students to hear, of the other kids thinking that,
Mm-hmm.
so they kind of hear it in a different way than maybe the way you've explained it, because sometimes that's helpful. So
Absolutely. And it just reinforces that classroom climate
yeah,
that you've really
safety.
been trying to build. So it just like puts your money where your mouth is. It helps you like walk the walk of like, we are a community. Like, let's all learn from each other. Let's look at these different examples and let's hear from different students and like collectively help us, progress.
Thank you for sharing those five um 5 steps. Is that what that would be? Five
Yeah, I would just call them, yeah,
levels,
like,
five
yeah, five
five
steps is
levels.
great.
So one question that I got specifically from a math teacher who I work with, she really wanted to know if you had suggestions on how to get students who are below grade level excited about math, and how do we take these students who are below grade level to excel at their current level, if that makes sense.
Yes. So that's a great question. I think I'm going to take, like refer back to something I said earlier and just turn it on its head. I think a lot of times when we feel like we're not great at something, we don't like it. Conversely, when we start to feel like we are improving in an area, we're gaining skills, and we're being successful, we start liking it more. When you like it more, it's easier to be excited about something. So, one answer is to help students be more successful, help them have some wins. A couple things that come to my mind. Number one, is to help them track their progress. We did something that we called like passports, and in building thinking classrooms, actually there's some similar ideas there. He takes it much further than we did and has a lot of tips about the how-to of it, but essentially it's helping students keep track of like what they're learning in a unit and the progress that they're making, so that even
So
if
they can visually
they
see.
can visually see the different pieces of the unit and how they're moving along. Because even if there's 10 different steps to it, I'll give you an example. You know what? We did this with our 8th graders when we were moving into multi-step equations. And the concern was, I hear this all the time, my kids can't even solve one-step equations. So we created this thing we called a ladder and let the students in on it. Rung 1 was one-step equations with like all positive whole numbers, and then 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. I don't remember exactly what they were. And there were different, students would just start and they would solve, and then there were keys throughout the room, and then they could sort of move to the next level and track it. And so not everybody moved through in the same day, in the same moment, but they could see like, I started on number 1, now I'm on number 2, now I'm on number 3, and I'm making progress. So I think tracking your progress and like celebrating the steps along the way is one way. I think another way is to start off lessons with a win. And this struck me when I was working with a teacher, and we did the opposite, not intentionally, but we knew that we were planning a lesson about combining like terms, and I can't remember exactly what it was that she was like, oh, they're not strong with this yet. And so our idea was like, let's give that to them in the do now. We'll like address that prerequisite in the do now. But the irony of that is that when you give a do now, you're starting the lesson off with something you already know, you don't think they know, and they're not confident in. And traditionally, do nows are done independently, silently, while you take attendance, right? So I walked around, and how many blank papers did I see? There were even students who threw them on the floor, like several students. And it was like, okay, that backfired. Like our goal was to help them work on something that was a prerequisite for the lesson coming up so that they could be successful. And I mean, it was so obvious in that moment, me walking around, I was like, that was like not smart. Why did we do that? Like, that's not how you do that. And so I would start off the lesson with a win, like what it could be a win. Let's give them something they do know how to do. Or let's, again, with the notice and wonder, let's put something in front of them where maybe it is around combining like terms, but you just put a bunch of terms on a page. What do you notice and what do you wonder? Everybody can answer that. And it would still like accomplish what your goal was, which is having some way to create that bridge from what they know or what they can reason through to where you're going. But let's do it in a way where they can come up with answers and they can be successful, not in a way where you're putting right in their face what they don't know. So let me think if there's any others, but I think those are two that come to mind, is like starting off with a win and helping them see their own progress and celebrating it.
I love that. I mean, that makes sense. Feels very doable. Yeah, I think sometimes it takes us a little bit to try to figure out how to get creative in that way, but that's okay. You know, so maybe you do start off with like the physical problems like of the do now, but then you can, as you go, you start to evolve and you're like, oh, maybe I can switch it up and do a notice and wonder, or do a, you know, to change it up for ourselves to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I love notice and wonder, because it's no extra prep for you. And you can take a lot of whatever your existing materials are and just layer it on top.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so even if you give them the do now, that's like the traditional one you would have given, but instead of having them like do the problems, you have them just reflect on them, or like maybe you even ask a question like this, like you could give them the same do now. Maybe there's 8 problems there where they previously would have combined the like terms. You could just ask them, which of these look similar to you and like which ones are different, or like if you had to put these in 2 different categories, which ones would you put, or something like that. Like fine, like decide, because that would help them at least start to see structure, where they could say, oh, well, number 1 and number 4 both have the same letter in them. Do you get what I'm saying? Like they could just start to like start seeing what's the same and what's different. And then when you go into your lesson, you just add the vocabulary on. You're like, a lot of you said that number 1 and number 4 were similar because you saw the same letter in number 1, like an A and an A. And in number 4, you saw an X and an X. Does anybody remember what we call those? Those are like terms. And here's the thing, when they're like terms, you can actually add them and subtract them.
Yeah, just yes. I'm just going to say yes. Because
did I lose you?
No, I think
okay.
It makes total sense. I just feel like you just explained that really, really well. So there's nothing for me to add. So
got it.
Chrissy, this has been wonderful. I know you have an incredible gift that you are including inside of our VIP toolkit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? But before you do, just want to remind people, if you have not upgraded your ticket yet, you're going to want to, because you're also going to want to join us in our bonus session where Chrissy and I are going to be diving deeper into bridging the gap. We're going to be talking about what do we do when there's not enough time? How is this different than differentiation? How do we lesson plan without it taking forever for us? Because lesson planning is one of the biggest, areas of time for us as teachers. But so you're not going to want to miss it. So Chrissy, tell us a little bit about your VIP toolkit contribution.
Yes. So I'm contributing a presentation that I have delivered many times, and a lot of teachers have told me how helpful it is. It's called the 5 Strategies to Increase Access to Grade Level Math. It sounds very similar to what the 10 strategies I told you about that are part of the bundle. And it really is. Basically, what I did is I pulled out 5 of those strategies that are in that PDF, and I walk through them one at a time, explaining what they are, but then also showing what it looks like in a lesson. And in that session, you'll hear me talk about the combining like terms situation that I just told you about, and I'll share what I actually suggested to that teacher that she do the next day in order to have a more successful, more fruitful kickoff to her lesson. So please definitely check that out.
I love it. That sounds fantastic. Where can we go to learn more about you online?
Yeah. So my website is mindfulmathcoach.com. You can go there and kind of, poke around and see what you see. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at Mindful Math Coach. And if you're a podcast listener, that's definitely the place I would point you. I have a podcast. It's called the Mindful Math Podcast, and you can just search for it on Apple or Spotify or just whatever your favorite podcasting platform is. There are about 70 episodes there now. Actually, there's probably more than 70 by the time you are listening to this, and there's something for everybody. All around like effective math teaching practices, but with a real angle on this idea of unfinished learning. Like many of the episodes are about increasing access and how to do that. So definitely check that out.
I love that. That's amazing. Everyone, please go check out Chrissy's podcast, the Mindful Math Podcast. Perfect time to listen to it is on your drive home or drive to school. Chrissy, thank you so much for joining us. So appreciate you being here, and we will catch everyone in our bonus session. Bye.
You're welcome. And Kathy, thank you so much for the invitation. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Chrissy. Bye.